Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. I apologize to the court. I've reconsidered, and I have no further questions.
No apologies necessary.
Okay.
You may step down. Call your next witness.
We'll call James Van Norman.
Come forward, please. When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
James F. Van Norman, capital V-A-N, capital N-O-R-M-A-N.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Van Norman, the first thing I'm going to ask is try to use that microphone that's on your right there.
Okay.
And you have, as you just did, you have to kind of sit close to it. It's a little hard to do in this courtroom. Everybody's had that problem. Okay, first of all, do you know the gentleman seated here to my right?
Yes, I do.
And who is that?
Michael Jackson.
All right, when did you first meet Mr. Jackson?
The first time I met Michael it was either 1990 or 1991 while I was employed with Madonna.
What were you doing for Madonna at that time?
Personal security.
Is that like a bodyguard?
Yes, sir.
All right, now, let me go back to your background and education. Do you have any particular education, formal education, in the area of becoming a bodyguard?
I have a Bachelor's of Arts from Arizona State in criminology. As for being a bodyguard, I just got into it in college and kept working it.
And what did you do immediately after college?
I went to work for different organizations in the security field.
All right, did you do anything? Did you have any other employment other than the security field?
No.
All right, and when you went into the security field, eventually you started working for Madonna, is that correct?
Eventually, I went to work for Madonna in 1988.
And prior to 88, did you have other experience as a bodyguard or personal security person?
Yes, I worked for a company out of Dayton, Ohio, called Professional Law Enforcement, a division of Business Risk International. I did a lot of strike work where I worked as a bodyguard for the comptrollers and the CEOs of the companies.
All right, now, when you went to work for Madonna, can you describe the kind of work that you did for her? You said bodyguard, personal security. What was the level of your involvement?
I'm going to object as immaterial and irrelevant.
Sustained.
All right, when you first met with Mr. Jackson and you first went to work for him, what was your assignment?
I was working personal security for Mr. Jackson.
All right, and what did that entail? Did that entail going on tour? Or give us an idea.
At first it entailed, I started doing a lot of video shoots, where we'd, be on site working the video shoots. I'd be making sure anybody coming to see Michael had to check in with us, and I'd be with him if we were out of town. If we did a tour, I went on the tour.
All right, now, there are different, let me withdraw that. How many different security people worked for Mr. Jackson around that period of time when you first started working for him?
When I first started, there was an A team, a B team, and then you'd have your ranch security also.
All right, so let's talk about what the A team and the B team did.
The A team was his personal security that was with him 24/7 as a bodyguard. The B team usually worked some video shoots, but they were usually on tour, and they would do the stadium setup ahead of time with the local security, and they'd do some advance work.
All right, so were you on the A team or the B team?
A team.
So the B team might go. If there was a venue where Mr. Jackson was going to perform, the B team might go in advance and set up all the security and work with local police, that sort of thing?
Yes, they'd be there ahead of time, before us, to make sure we got into the building safely.
All right, and the A team, when the A team traveled, did the A team travel with Mr. Jackson personally?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you wouldn't go ahead and just be there to greet him?
No, I'd be with him personally.
And how long did you maintain that position as a member of the A team traveling personally with Mr. Jackson?
Probably 1991 until sometime in 94.
Okay, was part of the concern that you had or part of your job to make sure that Mr. Jackson was personally safe, in other words, not assaulted?
Yes, sir.
Was that a concern during that period of time, from 91 to 94?
Always.
And was that part of your training through the other company you had worked for, to deal with the potential for assault?
Yes, sir.
And I earlier asked, and I'm going to ask a slightly different question, so don't answer it until there's a chance to object.
Could I ask counsel to stop the gratuitous remarks and get to the question? I object.
Well, and I object to that.
Well, I object to both of you. Laughter.
Well, the same objection was made.
Be quiet, Mr. Sneddon. You raise an objection with one word.
I object.
To Mr. Sanger. Same with you. Overruled. Next question.
Okay. So this question. Did you learn anything from your work with Madonna as to how to deal with celebrities?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what sorts of lessons did you learn from working with Madonna? Let's put it this way. Is there a particular issue with regards to fans, in other words, fans who may appear to be adoring fans? Is that always a safe thing to assume?
No, it's not.
Alright, now, in your work with Mr. Jackson, you said you traveled from time to time, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Where did you travel to from 91 to 94?
All over the world, everywhere.
Who was the head of the security department, let us say, for Mr. Jackson during that period of time?
Bill Bray.
Alright, and did Bill Bray have an office?
Yes, he did.
Where was that?
Down in Westwood.
And was there an office for MJJ Productions?
Yes, sir.
Was his office in that corporate office?
Yes, sir.
What was MJJ Productions, to your knowledge?
Michael J. Jackson Promotions, Productions.
Okay, so it was his company, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And what did MJJ Productions do? You said promotions. What did they promote?
They did everything. I mean, they got involved with the tours. They handled all of Michael's business affairs.
Alright, now, Mr. Bray, who you referred to, was then in charge of a particular part of this. Can you describe first of all, what was the name of his organization, if he had one?
It was the Office of Special Services, and they handled all of Michael's personal security needs and all kinds of security needs.
Alright, did he do some things other than strictly security?
He probably did, but I don't recall.
Alright, so Mr. Bray was in charge of the A team and the B team, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And in charge of Mr. Jackson's security in general, no matter what, wherever it was.
Yes, sir.
Did Mr. Bray sometimes travel on tour?
All the time.
Now, Mr. Bray was there when you started working for Mr. Jackson, correct?
Mr. Bray hired me.
Alright, and do you have any idea of how long Mr. Bray had been with Mr. Jackson?
25, 30 years.
Okay, what was Mr. Bray's background?
Law enforcement.
And what particularly in law enforcement?
He was with the LAPD.
Was he retired?
Yes, sir.
He had been in the robbery, homicide squad?
I believe so.
Alright, now, did Mr. Bray have a second in command, as it were, of his security operation?
Yes, sir.
Who was that?
Wayne Nagin.
And did Wayne Nagin travel on tour?
Yes, sir.
Did he have anybody else in his direct chain of command?
By other.
Well, let me ask you, do you know who Betty Bailey is?
Yes.
Who is Betty Bailey?
Betty was Bill's assistant at the time.
So maybe I did the chain of command incorrectly there. Did Betty Bailey also have an office?
Yes, sir.
In Los Angeles? And what was her background?
I'm really not sure. I don't remember.
Alright, was it law enforcement? Or you don't know?
It might have been.
In any event, this was the office that you reported to, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you coordinated your activities to protect Mr. Jackson?
Yes, sir.
How many people were on the A team, generally?
6.
6 people? And how many on the B team?
Anywhere from 6 to 8.
Now, on a particular venue, when there was a concert or at a particular venue when there was a concert, would security interact with local police?
Yes, sir.
And just briefly, describe how that would work.
We'd meet with them, or the advance guy would meet with them ahead of time to work out traffic, work out escape routes, different things throughout, that's going to go on during a concert that we needed to let them be aware of.
Now, when the concert was not going on, I take it that there were times Mr. Jackson would be residing off of his property. He'd be residing at a hotel somewhere in the world?
Yes, sir.
Did you provide security in that respect as well?
Yes, sir.
All right. And did you work with the hotel security to try to coordinate things?
All the time.
When you traveled with Mr. Jackson, where would you personally stay?
I was usually in the room right next door to Mr. Jackson.
Would that be in a suite with an adjoining door, or?
At times there was adjoining doors. Sometimes it was the small little maid's quarters. It all depended on where we were. I mean, sometimes I had a suite. Sometimes I had a little room. It didn't matter.
All right. And how much of the day would you personally spend with Mr. Jackson from 91 to 94?
That would all depend on what was going on. I mean, sometimes he'd stay in his room. Sometimes we'd go out for the whole day. I mean, all depended on the day, what was going on. And if he had a show the night before, he'd stay in most of the next day.
Was it easier to go out with Mr. Jackson in Europe than in the United States?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Was it harder?
Yes.
Okay, and why was that?
They had a large fan base, and you're in different countries, different customs, different rules and regulations, and, in certain countries they let the fans run wild where there was no, outside security helping us, so it could become quite chaotic.
Was it easy for Mr. Jackson to go out in the United States?
No.
During the period of time you were with Mr. Jackson from 91 to 94, can you describe what it would be like for Mr. Jackson to try to go to, say, a mall to shop?
I'm going to object as immaterial, irrelevant.
It's going.
What's the relevancy?
Do you want me?
What is the relevancy?
Mr. Van Norman took over as ranch manager in 94 and took over the security concerns of the ranch itself.
All right, well, then the objection is sustained on the question that was asked.
All right. As far as going out in public in general, was Mr. Jackson able to simply go out in public without a group of security people?
Very rare occasions.
And if he did that, how would he do it?
I'll object. Immaterial and irrelevant.
Sustained.
All right, a little more direct question, if I may. Would he have to wear a disguise, for the most part, to go out?
Sometimes.
Object as immaterial and irrelevant.
Overruled. The answer was, sometimes. Next question.
All right, now, in 1993, do you recall some particular publicity coming out about Mr. Jackson that caused additional security concerns?
Yes.
And what was that?
That was the Jordy Chandler case.
Okay, the allegations that were made at that time, yes?
Yes.
And those allegations were published in the press widely?
Yes, sir.
Were they published in the mainstream press?
Published all over the world.
What effect did that have on Mr. Jackson's personal security?
It got a lot tougher for us, not only with the fans, but then we had the media that was all over us also.
Okay, and at some point, did you, or let me withdraw that. When did you first go to Neverland Ranch?
The first time I went to Neverland Ranch was after the Dangerous tour in '93.
All right, and was that at the time that these allegations had surfaced and the media was publishing all sorts of things?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you had not been to the ranch before that had occurred?
No.
So you don't know what the security policies were at the ranch prior to your arriving there, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, when you arrived there at the ranch, was Mr. Jackson with you?
No.
And what was your purpose in going to the ranch?
To secure it for his arrival. He was coming back from London.
All right, so you were there a matter of days before he got there?
About a day or two.
Day or two. All right, and then Mr. Jackson was there at the ranch, correct?
Yes, sir.
Was he there continuously at the ranch through the end of your tenure?
No, he wasn't there continuously. He would only come at different times.
He would go different places?
Different places, yes.
At what point did you cease being on the A team, as it were, and start working at the ranch?
Sometime in '94 Michael asked me to look after the ranch for him, so I did.
And were you at some point, in essence, the ranch manager?
Yes, sir.
Did you move to this area?
Yes, I did.
Where did you move to?
At first I stayed on the ranch itself. And then I moved into Los Olivos, and eventually I was down in the same area.
Santa Ynez area?
Santa Ynez, yes.
And how long did you live there?
Upwards till August of 98.
Okay. And then in August of 1998, what did you do?
I went to work for the Viejas Indian tribe down in San Diego.
Is that where you still work?
Yes, sir.
And your wife was employed, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What was her employment?
Object as immaterial and irrelevant, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did your wife's employment have anything to do with your moving?
No.
Alright, so in 93, you come to 93 you come to the ranch. And was there a security office at the ranch?
Yes, there was.
Did they have security guards?
Yes, they did.
Who was in charge of that at that time?
I believe his name was Bob Wagner.
After Mr. Wagner, who took over?
I think there was a brief time where the lieutenant just stepped in, Steve Bailey, and then Qasim Abdul.
And did Mr. Abdul become the chief of security?
From what I recall, yes.
Okay. Did you carry a firearm at the ranch in 1993-94?
Yes, I did.
Did you carry the firearm at all times?
On the ranch, yes.
And you were trained in firearm safety, is that right?
Years ago, yes.
Did you ever display your firearm at anybody for any purpose?
Never.
Are you aware that Mr. Abdul alleged that you pulled out your firearm and pointed it through the gate at a fan?
I'm aware of that, yes.
Did that ever happen?
No, sir.
Did you ever display your firearm in any way?
No, sir.
In other words, you carried it on your person?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever walk around with a gun just strapped to your hip?
No.
Alright. Now, at the time you were getting the ranch prepared in 93 for that day or two before Mr. Jackson got there, what were your concerns at that time as far as security was concerned?
We had a lot of media build up outside, and then of course we found a few of them sneaking onto the property. So they'd be hiding in bushes. They'd be doing whatever they can to get a picture. So we did have a lot of concern of people getting onto the property and getting close to the house.
Was there a concern about fans as well as media?
Yes, sir.
What was the concern about fans?
Same thing. They want to get on the property and try to get as close to Michael as they could.
Around that time, was there a lot of activity at the front gate?
Yes.
Can you describe what that was like?
Lots of media trucks, lots of fans, upwards of 500 or 600 people just standing out there waiting to see who's coming in and who's going.
Did you evaluate the security systems at the ranch at that time?
I took a look at them, yes.
Okay. Did you do anything to change them?
I tried, but they didn't get changed.
Alright. Were the security systems state of the art?
No, sir.
Can you describe them?
There was some sensors outside that, usually the deer or the raccoons would trigger. The house wasn't very secure at the time. That's about it. It wasn't a good security system at the time.
During the time that you were there, did you make some changes with regard to securing the house?
Yes, sir.
And what kinds of changes?
We limited the access to the house. At times we posted guards at the house. Key access especially. That, to let the doors be opened by only certain individuals so the house would be locked down so nobody could get in it unless they were, supposed to go into it.
And did this happen immediately or did this take place over time?
It took place over time.
Now, you said key access. Were there keypads on the house, or were there keys, or do you remember?
There were keys at that time.
Alright, and so you started, over this period of time, starting to insist that the doors actually be locked?
Yes, sir.
And that certain people would have keys to get in, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Were guests given keys?
No, sir.
So if somebody wanted to get in, they'd call security?
They'd call security, yes.
Did they call housekeeping?
They had keys also.
Alright, Now, nevertheless, if there were guests staying on the property in the guest units, for instance, would they be allowed to have free access to the house?
Yes, sir.
Alright, so who were you trying to keep out?
Fans and media.
Alright, during the period of time you were there, did any fans actually penetrate the property?
Yes, sir.
About how many occasions?
There was quite a few that they got on the property. As to actually getting to the house, there was a few occasions that they did actually get to the house, and one occasion where they got in.
Okay, and where did the person get in? Where did the person who got in end up?
She ended up in the back door, up the stairs, hiding in a crawlspace for the whole day.
Did that appear to you to be a serious breach of security?
Yes, sir.
And based on your experience with Madonna and your other experience in the industry, are celebrity stalkers sometimes dangerous?
Very.
Most of the time not, I take it.
You never know. I mean, they change. They're very dangerous at times, though.
Alright, now, during the time that you were working for Mr. Jackson, did you have occasion to know the Barnes family?
Yes, sir.
Did you see them with Mr. Jackson?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about the family that you saw?
Very nice family. They did a lot of traveling with us. I liked them.
Okay, and who were the family members that you remember seeing?
Brett, Carly, Mrs. Barnes, and occasionally Mr. Barnes.
So the whole family, 2 parents
Yes.
and a son and daughter. Did you have occasion to meet Macaulay Culkin and his family?
I met Macaulay, but not his family, and that was at a time in Chicago when I was there doing a video with Michael.
So you didn't see Macaulay Culkin or his family at the ranch when you were there?
No.
Alright, do you know Wade Robson and his family?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that family?
I don't remember if I think they were at the ranch a few times, but I met him more at video shoots that we did. And Wade was dancing and things like that. His mother was Joy.
Okay, did you have occasion to meet Jordy Chandler?
No.
Okay, did you ever meet his mother?
No.
Did you know Blanca Francia?
No.
She would have been gone before you arrived, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Alright, so therefore you didn't meet Jason Francia either?
No.
With all of those people that you just mentioned, the ones that you met, the Barnes, the Robsons, Culkin, to the extent that you saw him, did you ever see Mr. Jackson ever do anything inappropriate with any of them?
No, sir.
Now, you mentioned Bill Bray, who is a retired LA Police Department detective. Did he take an active interest in the security at Neverland Ranch?
When we first got there, yes.
And did he come up from time to time?
Yes, sir.
Did you answer to Mr. Bray during the time that you worked there?
During the whole time that I worked there?
Well, let's start with from 91 to 94.
From 91 to 94 I did, yes.
And then after you became ranch manager, you didn't report directly to him anymore?
No.
You still knew him?
Yes.
If you had seen anything inappropriate with these children or any law violations, would you have reported them to Mr. Bray?
Yes, sir.
By the way, did Mr. Bray travel on tour from time to time?
Yes, sir.
Now, how many employees were there at the ranch when you were working as ranch manager?
When I started or when I finished?
Give us the range.
I think there was about 160 when we first went up there, and about 80 in 98 when I left.
Okay, and did the various department heads report to you?
Yes, sir.
So at that time, you would have had housekeeping, security, fire, zoo, all the others would have reported to you. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you have meetings with them from time to time?
Yes, sir.
And the employees that you described, from 160 at the high point down to maybe 80 some at the lower point, were those people who lived in the community here?
Yes, sir.
And how many people were there who came up from, as it were, from the corporate headquarters, who worked there?
I'm going to object as immaterial.
Sustained.
Okay. Did at some point Mr. Abdul, Qasim Abdul, Ralph Chacon and Adrian McManus stopped coming to work?
Yeah, they just stopped coming to work.
Did they all stop on the same day?
Pretty much.
Okay. Did they at some point sue you?
Yes, sir.
And they sued 7 other employees, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Sued Bill Bray?
Yes, sir.
Betty Bailey?
Yes, sir.
With the exception of, let me withdraw that. Melanie Bagnall also joined that lawsuit, is that correct?
Correct.
And she sued Andrew Merritt, is that right?
Yes, sir.
With the exception of Andrew Merritt, were all the people that were sued people from the corporate headquarters, for lack of a better term?
Yes, sir.
And what was the outcome of that lawsuit?
We won it hands down. I think it was 12, no, verdicts on all but one.
The all but one.
Was the Andy Merritt?
Melanie Bagnall's claims against Andy Merritt?
Yes, sir.
Andy Merritt was a security guard?
Yes, sir.
And he won that as well?
He won that as well, yes.
10-3 or something?
Something like that.
I'm going to object. Asked and answered. Move to strike.
Overruled.
Okay, now, with regard to the 93 period of time, do you recall in 93 whether or not there were certain people who went to the media to sell their stories?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall who some of those people were?
Yes, sir.
Tell us.
Ralph Chacon, Adrian McManus, and Qasim Abdul, Melanie Bagnall, Sandy Doms.
Now, actually, before they went to the media, were there any other employees who had gone to the media?
I believe there were, but I don't remember the names.
Do you remember if Blanca Francia?
Your Honor, I'm going to object as leading.
Overruled.
Do you remember if Blanca Francia was one of them?
I remember hearing that, yes, but I didn't know her.
These were people that were before you got there?
Yes, sir.
During the time you were ranch manager, you said you reported directly to Bill Bray before you were ranch manager?
Yes.
After you were ranch manager, who did you report to?
Steve Chabry or Mr. Jackson himself.
Who was Steve Chabry?
He was the CEO at the time of MJJ Productions.
And he had an office down in LA?
Yes.
And he would have been Mr. Bray's boss as well, I suppose.
I don't know if they were separate or not, but Mr. Chabry was overseeing the whole operation at the time.
And you said you also reported to Michael Jackson?
Yes, sir.
Now, have you gotten to know Mr. Jackson on a personal basis, personal level?
Yes, sir.
And how did that occur?
I think over years of, building up the trust that, Michael felt comfortable with me, and we talked about different things, and I was able to talk to him about things that were going on.
Alright, and that occurred before you became ranch manager?
Yes, sir.
While you were ranch manager, did you still have the opportunity to talk with Mr. Jackson when he was on the property?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to him every day?
No, sir.
Alright, what was your, let's say, policy or attitude towards talking with Mr. Jackson?
I would only talk to him if he would come up to me or if I really needed to ask him something about what was going on. I didn't make it a point to try to, buddy up with him and get to know him, but I had a job to do.
Alright, and at the ranch, if there was a policy decision about security, for instance, how would that policy decision generally be made?
When I was the ranch manager, I would make the ultimate decision on the policy.
Did you ask Mr. Jackson?
No.
Alright, and who would you consult with when you were ranch manager?
Sometimes I'd run it through Evie, who was Michael's, that worked for Michael down in LA a lot of times. Depending on the policies, I made the decision myself.
And going the other way in the chain of command, who would you consult with?
What do you mean, going the other way?
In other words, would you talk to the head of security, for instance?
I talked to them, yes, about why we're doing this and why it needs to be done.
With regard to other decisions of that sort, was Mr. Jackson hands-on running things at the ranch, telling people what to do?
No, sir.
Would Mr. Jackson from time to time ask employees for things, for assistance with something, unlock a door?
Yes, sir.
As far as making these policy decisions on security and that sort of thing?
No, he wasn't involved.
Alright, and despite the fact you left employment to go down and work in San Diego, do you still consider Mr. Jackson to be a friend?
Yes, sir.
Have you had any contact with him recently?
Just said hello yesterday. I haven't seen him since I left, so I did consider him a friend, yes.
That's fair enough. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Cross-examine.
Good morning, Mr. Van Norman.
Good morning, Mr. Sneddon.
Hand me that water, if you would. When you began work for Mr. Jackson originally, you were strictly involved in either providing security on the videos or on a tour, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you did accompany Mr. Jackson on a European tour at one time?
Yes, sir.
And with regard to that particular tour, your responsibilities were security related on the A-team?
Yes, sir.
Were you carrying a weapon at that time?
No, sir.
Did you ever carry a weapon in the protection of Mr. Jackson during any of the tours that you went on with him?
No, sir.
Did you ever carry a weapon during any of the times that you did any video shoots with Mr. Jackson?
No, sir.
Did you ever carry a weapon at any of the times when you provided security for Mr. Jackson when he was doing concerts?
No, sir.
The video shoots that you went on with Mr. Jackson were often done in a public setting, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
The reason that you had to interact with the local law enforcement is sometimes they would be done with a lot of fans standing around watching what was going on, correct?
Yes.
And oftentimes in the concerts that you were at, there were thousands and thousands of fans in an open venue.
Yes, sir.
Correct? Now, during the time that you said you began your employment on the ranch in December of 1993, okay? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that you, prior to that, had been on tour with Mr. Jackson?
Yes, sir.
Now, when the allegations surfaced about the Jordan Chandler situation with Mr. Jackson, the tour was aborted, was it not?
Aborted, meaning over?
Yeah, it was stopped prematurely?
No, sir.
You don't recall Mr. Jackson being in Mexico for a month or a month and a half?
Yeah, but when the allegations first came out, we were on tour and we didn't stop it right then and there. We continued until we got to Mexico City, and then we canceled a few dates after that.
And then you went to England for a while. Did you go with Mr. Jackson to England?
No, sir.
So there were several months where Mr. Jackson was out of the country in either Mexico or England where you weren't part of his team at that time.
He left right from Mexico to England, and I don't think it was several months. I think it was 6 weeks.
I won't quibble with you over a couple weeks, but you weren't part of the A-team providing security at that time?
I don't think he had anybody with him at the time.
Now, when you got to the ranch, you did carry a weapon, correct?
Yes, sir.
You were armed?
Yes, sir.
And the other OS officers were also armed?
Yes, sir.
And there were 4 of them?
Yes, sir.
The names, Tony Coleman is one I know.
Tony Coleman, Marcus Johnson, Jerome Johnson.
Okay. Now, you know what a guard card is, don't you?
Yes, sir.
What's a guard card?
A guard card is something that a security guard needs to work in the state of California.
And during the time that you were providing security for Mr. Jackson at his ranch from December of 93 on, you did not have a guard card, correct?
No, sir.
And the weapon that you were carrying on your person during the time you were employed there was a 9mm Glock?
Yes, sir.
And you had another sidearm. Not sidearm, but another weapon, pistol, I guess. It's a witness .40 semi-automatic?
Yes, sir.
And you had a stun gun?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you carry the one that you carried on your person most of the time was the 9mm Glock, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you carry that on your waist?
Usually on my back.
In a back here?
Back? Yes, sir.
Let's go back a little bit and talk about some of the tours you were on. You were in Chicago with Mr. Jackson with the Barnes family, correct?
Yes, sir.
And on all of the tours that you went on, was it your position to be in the room next door to Mr. Jackson's room?
I would say 95% of the time that's where my room was.
Fair enough. And it was your observation, was it not, that during the time that Brett Barnes was in Chicago, that he stayed with Mr. Jackson in Mr. Jackson's room, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And it was your observation that during the time that the Barnes family accompanied Mr. Jackson to South America, were you on that tour?
Yes, sir.
Continuing, that Mr. Jackson, that Brett Barnes spent virtually every night with Mr. Jackson in his bedroom, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And there was a South American tour, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Brett Barnes was on that tour with Mr. Jackson, correct?
I believe so.
And spent every night with Mr. Jackson in his room?
I believe so.
Were you present at the time that Mr. Jackson was about to get on the plane to leave for that tour to South America? Were you in the limo with Mr. Jackson?
I don't recall exactly where I was, whether I was in the limo, but I was on the tour, so I was either standing outside the limo or sometimes I drove in the limo with him.
Do you recall Brett Barnes being in the limo with Mr. Jackson?
I don't remember back then, that far.
Do you remember them having to take Mr. Barnes away from Mr. Jackson and hide him away from the people to get on the plane in a separate way?
No, I don't.
You don't recall any of that?
No, I don't.
How old was Brett Barnes about the time that he was traveling with Mr. Jackson, in your opinion?
About 13.
Teenager?
Yes, sir.
You never questioned what a teenager was doing in Mr. Jackson's bedroom night after night after night?
No, sir.
You didn't think it was inappropriate for a teenager to be sleeping with a 35-year-old man?
No, sir.
Not his relative?
No, not at the time.
While you were at the ranch, you did purchase some security equipment in an attempt to upgrade the systems there, right?
Not really to update the systems. Just to give them a little more security to certain areas, yes.
But you did buy some security equipment?
Yes, I did.
And did you ever buy any eavesdropping devices?
No, sir.
Anything that you plugged into the wall so you could listen to people?
No, sir.
When you purchased the equipment that was to upgrade the security system there, would the invoice that you were given correctly describe the items that you bought?
No, sir.
In other words, it was not correct?
It was not correct, yes.
And what was the reason that the invoice did not accurately depict the things that you actually purchased?
We didn't want anybody to know we were purchasing video equipment to go outside of Mr. Jackson's bedroom so he could see who's coming down the hallway. And we felt it was nobody else's business what we were doing. So if we depicted it as video equipment and what it was, then it serves no purpose, that people would know that there's a camera out there.
Well, who would be looking for invoices that you'd buy security equipment from?
People that go through the invoices. The accountants. The people at the ranch that were working in administration. It was none of their business.
So you didn't use that invoice to hide the fact that you bought eavesdropping devices that were inserted into all the walls in the house?
I didn't buy any eavesdropping devices, sir.
Okay. The ranch phone system. I believe you indicated previously that, to your knowledge, there are 3 places where one can overhear a telephone call, correct?
Yes, sir.
One is in the administrative office?
Yes, sir.
One is at the guard shack?
Yes, sir.
And the other is in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes, sir.
Those are the only 3 places, to your knowledge, when you worked there that could be done?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall a situation where you were called out to the ranch involving a disagreement between Mr. Coleman and Mr. Chacon over a person who had come onto the ranch?
I recall something of that, but I really don't recall the whole incident.
Do you recall there was a couple of foreigners who had mistakenly strayed onto the ranch and were encountered by guards?
Mistakenly?
Yeah.
Okay, no. I do recall that incident, yes.
Well, they thought.
It's coming back to me.
Well, they were given permission to go on the neighbor's ranch, correct?
I don't know the whole story, no. I don't recall it. I recall bits and pieces, but I don't know why they were on Michael's ranch to begin with.
So you didn't look into it, as the chief of security, to ascertain whether there was a system failure here?
I wasn't the chief of security.
You were one of the security guards?
Right, but I wasn't handling that issue. It was Mr. Coleman.
You actually, as a matter of fact, took reports from the individuals involved, did you not?
I don't.
This is beyond the scope of direct and relevance.
That has to do with his range of responsibilities, Your Honor. And it also involves Mr. Chacon.
The objection is sustained.
Did you not conduct an investigation?
I don't remember if I did. I did a lot of stuff at the time, and that actual thing I don't remember.
Do you recall whether the sheriff's department was called out?
Objection. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer.
Again, I don't remember the whole situation. They may have been.
Do you recall whether or not the people were arrested and prosecuted?
No, I don't.
Alright, just a couple more questions. One of the things that you did when you came onto the ranch in 93 OK was that you began to look at some of the personnel files, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you looked at Mr. Chacon's file twice, correct?
I believe so. Back then, it's a ways back, but I believe that's what I did state.
Okay.
On another case.
And you did look at Mr. Abdul's file, correct?
Yes, sir.
And one of the other things that you looked at was to compare the gate logs with the time cards to see whether or not any individuals on the ranch were cheating in terms of the number of hours they were working, correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. This is beyond the scope of direct and relevance, and 352.
I'm not sure where you're going.
It's credibility, Your Honor.
All right.
And I think you'll see when I ask the next question.
All right. Go ahead. Overruled.
And with regard to Mr. Chacon, you compared your records with the time cards and they were accurate. They didn't cheat the ranch, did they?
No, he didn't, but other employees did.
Move to strike as non-responsive.
The last part is stricken.
And with regard to Mr. Abdul, you checked his time cards with the gate logs and they were honestly filled out, correct?
Yes, sir.
And with regard to Adrian McManus, you also checked hers, and they were honestly filled out, correct?
Yes, sir.
And one of the other responsibilities that you conducted at the ranch was to determine whether or not there were any thefts from the ranch, correct?
We looked to see if things were missing and things along those lines, yes.
Correct. And in that connection, when you did that, you determined that Adrian McManus, to your knowledge, had never taken anything from the ranch, correct?
I don't remember investigating Adrian to see if she took anything from the ranch at that time.
Do you remember your deposition being taken in your lawsuit and being asked that question?
No, I don't remember right now. Sorry.
Alright. Do you remember the same question being asked as to Mr. Chacon, that you had?
Well, I'm sorry, Your Honor. If he doesn't remember the question, how can he remember the same question? So I object.
Maybe he just doesn't remember that individual.
Just stop talking to each other. The objection's overruled. You may ask that question. I'm not sure you got it all out.
I'll start over again, Your Honor. The question is, with regard to, I think we're on Mr. Chacon at this point, if I'm not mistaken, that you never saw Mr. Chacon take anything from the ranch, correct?
I never saw him take anything, no.
And with regard to Qasim Abdul, you never saw him take anything from the ranch?
I never saw him take anything, no.
And with regard to Miss McManus, you never saw her take anything from the ranch?
No, I never saw her take anything.
No further questions. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I do apologize. One area. This won't take long. Also, one of your responsibilities was that, after you came there in December of 93, the locks on Mr. Jackson's, the entrance door to Mr. Jackson's room were changed, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were one of the people who was given the directive to take care of that.
Yes, sir.
And as a matter of fact, it was changed on a couple of occasions due to some communication issues?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Jackson was not present on the ranch at that time, correct?
No, he was not.
And the orders were given that no one was to go into his room in his absence, correct?
I believe so.
And the locks that were changed are locks that lock on the inside of the door, correct?
Lock on the inside?
Yeah, that the locks on the inside?
Deadbolt on the inside?
Right.
I believe so, but I don't remember offhand.
Okay, alright, thank you. I'm sorry.
All right. Redirect.
Yes, thank you. Let's go to the question area about carrying weapons. First of all, did you, in the course of your employment with Mr. Jackson at the ranch, ever carry a concealed weapon off of his private property?
No, sir.
So if you went into Los Olivos or someplace else, you would not carry a concealed weapon, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you understand that you needed a guard card to carry a concealed weapon on Mr. Jackson's private property, at his home?
I don't believe that I did need a guard card at the time.
You did have training in firearms, right?
Years ago, yes.
Did you have any licenses in any jurisdictions to carry a weapon?
No, sir.
So when you were in other jurisdictions, did you ever carry a concealed weapon?
No, sir. We usually hired off-duty police officers to work with us.
All right.
Move to strike the last part as non-responsive, Your Honor.
Stricken.
All right, I was going to get back to this. You worked with actual on-duty law enforcement in various venues, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you hire people who were authorized to carry weapons in other jurisdictions?
Sometimes, yes.
Did Mr. Jackson like to have people have firearms around him?
No, sir.
I'm going to object. Call for speculation, conclusion, lack of foundation.
Let me withdraw it and phrase it in a different way, if I may. Did Mr. Jackson ever express to you whether or not he wanted people to have people carrying firearms around him?
Object. Hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't think he liked to have guns around him, no.
All right. In 1993, when you came to the ranch, and you've already described the situation with the media and fans and all that, well, let me withdraw it and put it directly this way. Why did you feel it was necessary to carry a concealed firearm while you were on the ranch property?
Well, if I can go back to when I worked with Madonna also, these fans can be very dangerous and sometimes they are armed. And there's been occasions where I've had fans that were armed that I've taken a gun away from, or a knife, and it's just for our protection, as well as, I'm not going to go in there blind and get myself hurt.
Now, at the ranch, was there a sheriff's station, within, say, a mile or two of the front gate?
No, sir.
And from time to time, did you actually go out and patrol areas away from the house?
Do you mean, oh, yeah, definitely, out in the woods and stuff like that, and we've caught fans out there.
And how would you go out into the wooded area?
Usually in a truck, occasionally on horseback.
All right, did any of you ever have to use your weapons in any way?
No, sir.
All right, there was a question about, well, let me ask you this. When people travel with Michael Jackson, would it be the responsibility of the personal security staff to also protect those people?
Yes, sir.
And would fans or other people have interest in people who travel with Michael Jackson simply because they were doing so?
Yes, sir.
So somebody might not be famous, but if they're with Michael Jackson, they're
in the line of fire, so to speak. There's instances where we were overtaken sometimes and we would have to get everybody out, so.
You were asked about children being with Mr. Jackson on tour and elsewhere. What was Mr. Jackson's attitude towards the children that you saw him with?
His attitude, meaning.
What's his demeanor? How did he behave with children?
I'll object to the foundation.
Sustained.
I'm asking about your personal observation of Mr. Jackson hanging out with children. First of all, did you see Mr. Jackson hanging out with children from time to time?
Yes, sir.
And what was your observation about his demeanor, his interrelation with these children?
He was like one of the kids. I mean, they'd have water balloon fights, pillow fights, food fights. It was a debacle, just a lot of things that kids do.
All right, and did this occur on tour?
Occasionally, yes.
Did it occur at his home at Neverland?
Most of the time.
Did Mr. Jackson did you see him with adults?
Yes, sir.
How did he interact with adults?
He'd interact. I mean, he was more shy around adults than he was with the kids. That's how I saw him, with the adults. He related more with the children.
Okay, there was a question about whether or not you called the sheriff or somebody called the sheriff with regard to an intruder. Let me ask you about the policy of the security department at the ranch. Was there a policy with regard to security officers arresting people?
I don't remember the policy right off the top of my head.
Well, let's make it simple.
They'd handcuff them. They'd handcuff them, and I believe then they would call the sheriffs, and the sheriffs would come and take them away.
Security didn't put people in their car or truck and drive them down to a sheriff's station?
No, sir.
So it would be routine policy to call the sheriffs if you had an intruder, is that right?
Yes, sir.
You were asked about, when you first came to the ranch, checking to see if there were people cheating on the payroll.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things you did, apparently, was to check their time cards against the gate logs, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, at that time you didn't find a discrepancy with regard to Mr. Abdul or Mr. Chacon, is that right?
That's correct.
And you were asked about initially looking into theft from the ranch, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
During your initial investigations into people cheating, were there other people who you investigated besides Abdul and Chacon?
Yes, sir.
Who?
Pretty much everybody that worked at the ranch.
Alright, and did you find some people cheating?
Yes, sir.
And was that part of your job, to try to make sure the ship was being run properly?
Yes, sir.
Alright, did you determine if anybody else had stolen from the ranch?
Determined by, we found out later on that there were things that were taken that were Mr. Jackson's personal effects.
Okay, before we get to that, in that initial investigation when you were looking to see if people had stolen.
Oh, yes, now I recall. We had people that stole stereos out of golf carts, things like that. We came across that and different things, and we did find that there were other things that were stolen.
Now, were most of the people that worked at the ranch honest, hardworking people?
Most of them were, yes.
So you found some that weren't?
Yes, sir.
Now, with regard to Miss McManus and Mr. Chacon, did you later develop evidence that they had stolen from the ranch?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to object. Lack of personal knowledge and foundation and vague as to what time.
Foundation. Sustained.
Okay, after Mr. Chacon and Ms. McManus left the ranch, did you determine whether or not they had stolen from the ranch?
Yes, sir.
Same objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation, personal knowledge.
Sustained.
Were you present every day of the trial where you were being sued by these people?
All 6 months, yes.
And did you see witnesses come and swear under oath that these people had stolen from the ranch?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. That's a highly improper question, and it's hearsay.
Sustained.
At the time Mr. Sneddon asked you about something that was said in the deposition. Do you remember when that deposition was taken?
Not exactly, no.
But it was sometime well before the trial, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Was there other investigation done between the time of your deposition and the trial?
Yes, sir.
Was it done by people other than you?
Yes, sir.
That were licensed private investigators?
Yes, sir.
Or at least one?
Yes.
So at the time of your deposition, you didn't have any personal knowledge of these people stealing from the ranch, is that correct?
Correct.
And from your point of view at the time of that deposition, that was your personal frame of mind, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that changed?
Yes, sir.
Objection, Your Honor. That calls for hearsay and conclusion, no personal knowledge.
Overruled. The answer was, yes, sir.
Alright, okay. I have no further questions.
No questions.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Your Honor, it would be our intention to play the tapes in the 5000 series. I forgot the exact number, but I'll get it here in just a moment.
I didn't hear counsel. I'm sorry.
Oh, is that on?
He's going to play the outtake tape.
Was the court anticipating that there would be some discussion as to what outtake tape would be played?
It's easy for you to say.
At one time.
No, I wasn't.
We would object to it being played in its entirety, as the content is not entirely relevant to the proceeding. And I think there should be some hearing on it, because I believe we're talking about hours of tapes.
2 hours.
We had a discussion with Mr. Sneddon. I thought it was resolved. I may be wrong, but
2 hours and, they can't hear you in the back. 2 hours and how long? Tell us.
I think it's 2 hours and 45 minutes, but I'm not positive as I stand here. I can look at my notes.
I would like to be heard as to the content.
All right,
At this time.
I'll excuse the jury for a couple minutes. We'll call you back in quickly. All right, counsel. Do you want to be heard?
To begin with, of course, the film, Living with Michael Jackson, was introduced for non-hearsay purposes, with the exception of small segments that dealt with actual admissions by the defendant to the extent that he sleeps with children and his relationship with the Arvizo children. The balance of it was for purposes of showing the response, the public response, to the damage to his career and for purposes of explaining the reaction by Mr. Jackson and his employees to that production. There was some discussion thereafter, but never one that was briefed. We still to this day do not have a written brief from the defense asking the court's permission to do this and explaining in writing the justification for doing it and giving clarity to the court as to exactly which sections of the outtakes they want to show and for what purposes. I viewed the outtakes on a few occasions. There are parts of the outtakes show films of Michael Jackson interacting with children on Neverland Ranch. There are films of Michael Jackson in the theater with children. There's a film of Michael Jackson showing a film. The film is on the film, a film that's a promotional film of Michael Jackson being shown to children in the theater. There's films of children walking around Neverland Ranch. None of these, I believe, are relevant to any issue that's properly before the court. There are, of course, clips of Debbie Rowe. There are clips of Mr. Jackson's father. There's a dialogue that deals with the question of whether or not Mr. Jackson's father was at any time abusive to the defendant. We don't believe that any of those interviews deal with issues that are properly before the court at this time. We believe that to the extent there's been any discussion as to what would be relevant, we think what would be relevant would be any film that corrects the presentation that may have been misleading in Mr. Bashir's interview. In other words, if there are outtakes that show the dialogue was taken out of context and that in fact the outtakes, the Hamid outtakes, would place that dialogue in an entirely different light and would correct it, then we believe that certainly would be appropriate to show to this jury. We don't believe that there's been any presentation by the defense to that extent. We don't believe that they have come forward and said that anything so far that appears in the Hamid Moslehi outtakes would in fact clarify any statements made by the defendant. And nor has there been anything in writing or any argument that any other aspect of the outtakes, the Moslehi outtakes, would actually clarify any aspect of the Living with Michael Jackson documentary. So our objection would be, first of all, that it be limited only to areas that specifically clarify what is believed to be misleading information in the Martin Bashir documentary, and that be brought to the court's attention in advance so that we know exactly which parts are being shown and that we have an opportunity to review it in advance of it being shown as well. As to the other part, the pictures of children running around, it's collateral. It's immaterial. It's irrelevant to any issue that's currently before the court. To the extent that there are statements by the defendant in there, again we believe that statements by the defendant would constitute hearsay, it being introduced for the truth of the matter stated, except to the extent that those statements are part of the interviews that were presented in the Martin Bashir and for which they clarify the actual statements that were made by the defendant. Any other statements that are unrelated to what was shown on Martin Bashir we believe would be hearsay by the defendant. Submit it.
I think Mr. Zonin is wrong. And I usually don't say that about a legal argument Mr. Zonin's making, but I think he's just wrong here factually. We're talking about the outtakes, the Hamid Moslehi outtakes. We're not talking about the Maury Povich show. The Maury Povich included Debbie Rowe material. The outtakes do not, unless there's.
I agree with you. I've watched the outtakes.
Alright, and there was also some other references to content that I think are in the Maury Povich production as opposed to this thing. So that's number one. Number two, procedurally, I think the court recalls I raised this with Mr. Sneddon in chambers, and then we came out, and there was a point where I was at the bench with Mr. Auchincloss, and Your Honor indicated that we could play it. I was prepared to submit a brief. I mean, we actually started doing something on that, and then when Your Honor said we could play it today, I instructed my associate lawyer, Mr. Dunkel, to stop working on that and to do something else. So we could have briefed it. However, we did brief this early on in the case and we filed a brief. I just don't have it with me, because I didn't anticipate this argument.
No, it had been briefed early on.
Yes.
And I had ruled that it wasn't admissible in the people's case.
Right, I'm sorry.
The problem with the outtakes is that it's so long, because it includes a lot of material that's not outtakes. I mean, I guess however you define outtakes. But it includes a lot of material that was in the original picture, because he's taking original video. He's taking that as the other person is taking it. But I am going to allow the playing of the entire tape, except I may have forgotten. It's some time since I watched it. If some material, such as the district attorneys alluded to, is on this tape that I don't recall, then you can object during the tape and I'll put the black screen up and we'll deal with it. I think what it is, though, is just a lot of what we've already seen, plus a little additional material. And it's all sort of tied in together.
And just to, because the jury's not here, so I can say it in advance in case it comes up that there's a contemporaneous objection. We're submitting this not only as the context under the evidence code for the statements that had been offered as admissions, and those statements, while brief, there were a couple, 3 pages of statements, they're rather comprehensive about Mr. Jackson's attitude and everything else. So the entire film puts that in context. In addition to that, the Hamid outtakes are important because the people introduced Bashir to start with, besides for the truth of the matter of some statements, they introduced it to show the state of mind of everybody. Well, the outtakes, as we already have evidence, were made known and were provided to Maury Povich before the 20th, so the state of mind of everybody was we had some pretty powerful material.
I'm letting that in.
Yes.
What I would keep out is, I have the same recollection you do. I think that the material that he was referring to is on a different tape. It doesn't involve this one. But
that's correct.
I'm just telling him it has nothing to do with Mr. Jackson's statements. That's not what I included. It has to do with scenes with children and that sort of thing. An interview with the father. Things he's alluded to. The interview with the ex-wife, that thing. I don't think that's on this, but if it is, alert me and I'll stop. But the rest of it, it's going to come in under the authorities that you had previously cited just now.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Let's have the jury come back. We'll get 15 minutes in before our break.
Your Honor, will there be an instruction to the jury with regards to the statements of the defendant not being admitted for the truth of the matter stated, except to the extent that they are inconsistent with statements that perhaps came in for the truth of the matter stated in the Povich film, or, the Bashir film?
That wouldn't be the law. The entire statement can come in if part of it is admitted.
Yeah. I'm not going to give them any further warning at this time.
Before you call, I just want to make sure this works. Your Honor, before you call them in, for some reason our side seems to be jinxed. Can I just make sure it works?
Yes, that would be a good thing to do.
I'm going to push all the buttons here, and I don't want to do anything with that one.
Are you doing it on the DVD?
Yes, I certainly hope so.
Could you try input 4, Judge?
And that just reminds me what I was going to do.
Bring the jury in?
He wants to say something. Just a moment.
This is in the reverse order. So what I propose to do there, they're numbered as 5009A, B and C, which corresponds to the order the sheriff marked them, as 10, 11 and 12. But I believe that 11 and 12 come before 10 chronologically, so I'd just like to play it in that order, if I could. So it would be B, C and then A.
You can play it in whatever order you want to. All right, bring in the jury.
Could we approach just to be clear on something? Or Mr. Auchincloss come up, too?
Yeah. Me too? Discussion held off the record at sidebar.
To the jury, Mr. Sanger is going to tell you what the tape is that you are about to watch.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, the exhibit is number 5009A, B and C, and we intend to play it in the order of B, C, A. These are videos that were seized by the Sheriff's Department. Mr. Mosley has testified that he had taken videos while Mr. Bashir was interviewing Mr. Jackson. And these, it was agreed that we would not have to call him back to authenticate these documents, or these videos.
All right, that's fine. You may start.
Thank you. I'll put in 5009B. Whereupon, a portion of a DVD, Defendant's Exhibit 5009B, was played for the court and jury.
Why don't we stop?
Your Honor, I stopped it at 7:20, in case it gets lost. Okay.
All right, go ahead.
We'll resume with 5009B, if we may. Whereupon, A portion of a DVD, Defendant's Exhibit 5009B, was played for the court and jury. That's the end of that disc. And we'll put the next one in, with the court's permission.
Go right ahead.
For the record, this is 5009C. Whereupon, a DVD, Defendant's Exhibit 5009C, was played for the court and jury.
We'll go ahead and take the recess now while you set up the next tape.
Yes, Your Honor. The clerk reminded me that we had not formally moved 5009A, B and C into evidence. I think it was implicit in the court's ruling, but I want to officially do it on the record, if you may.
You may.
Thank you. And we now have 5009A, which I will start, and it's Sheriff's 913C. Whereupon, a portion of a DVD, Defendant's Exhibit 5009A, was played for the court and jury. Your Honor, I think there's about 4 minutes left, but I could be wrong.
There's no time left.
There's no time left. That's fine.
See you tomorrow at 8:30.
Thank you.